It's time for another tube line that never got built, and this is one I've always been curious about. You see, at one time, the Central Line was very serious about extending to Richmond. Well, at 3 times, actually. Let's investigate. The Central Line was originally the Central London Railway. There's a clue as to the problem they were having in their name. You see, building a railway in central London is expensive, even if it's deep under the ground. Sites for stations are worth more, so there's a lot more legal wrangling. There are more things that need digging up or avoiding. The way to balance this out is to tap into the commuter market. Rails in the suburbs or outside London are relatively cheap. Relatively. The CLR's first step into the suburbs was when they had taken over a scheme known as the London Central Subway to reach Shepherd's Bush. In 1908 they reached Wood Lane. That was pretty good, but they wanted more. So they teamed up with the Great Western Railway to run services into Ealing Broadway using a new line the GWR were planning. This was authorised in 1911. This was even better than building their own line because the costs would be shared. But the Central London Railway had their eye on another prize. South West London had an extensive network of branch lines built by the London and South Western Railway running into Waterloo. These suburbs and satellite towns had historically attracted a fairly well-off populace, being close enough to the city to commute, but far enough out that they felt pleasantly rural. The Central London Railway realised that if they could get onto those lines, they could offer something the London and South Western could not: direct access to the city and the West End, and electric trains. The LSWR did have a line into the city, namely the Waterloo and City, but it only served Bank and necessitated changing trains at Waterloo. As for electric trains, these were a huge selling point in the early 20th century. It was known as the Sparks effect. In 1912, the CLR proposed to build an extension. This would branch off from Shepherd's Bush and head west to Gunnersbury. There would be 5 completely new stations: the Grove, Paddenswick Road, Rylet Road, Emlyn Road, and Heathfield Terrace, plus an interchange at Turnham Green with the District Railway. Just before Gunnersbury, it would join the District Railway and head to Richmond. Then, at Richmond, the idea was that it could run on to Twickenham, then over the Shepperton branch. There were also ideas of extending to Hanwell and Chertsey, but I don't know how concrete those were. The scheme had its upsides and its downsides. It used existing track for most of its length. However, a lot of that track would need to be electrified. The section between Gunnersbury and Richmond was already electrified, but using a different system from the CLR. Nevertheless, the scheme was well thought out enough to receive parliamentary approval in 1913. That same year, the CLR was taken over by the Underground Group, who owned a number of the CLR's rivals, which should have made things easier. But then circumstances changed. Most obviously, the First World War, which put major projects like this firmly on the back burner. But while the CLR was stroking the plans and muttering, "Soon, my pretty," the LSWR were working on a programme of electrification, in part to remove one of the major potential advantages the CLR had. By the end of January 1916, the line to Shepperton was fully electrified. But as the old saying goes, when one door closes, another one opens. While the LSWR had been electrifying their suburban lines, they had also stopped operating a service from Olympia to Turnham Green, leaving those tracks derelict. So the CLR returned to the proverbial drawing board and came up with a new proposal in 1920. This would involve a new connection at Shepherd's Bush, then a station at Hammersmith, which I assume would be the by then abandoned Hammersmith Grove Road. Then it would join the District Railway east of Ravenscourt Park and run on to Richmond. Interestingly, despite their earlier concerns vis-à-vis rivalry, the LSWR supported this scheme. But it didn't happen, in large part due to another of the Underground Group's lines, the Piccadilly Tube. In 1912, the Underground Group had made it known that they planned to extend the Piccadilly line from their then-current terminus at Hammersmith to Richmond, along the District Line. The group didn't see any sense in having 3 lines serving Richmond. As the Piccadilly extension was simpler and offered better connections, that's what they went for. The old LSWR line that the CLR would have used fell into disrepair. Of course, as we now know, the Piccadilly line never got to Richmond either. At present, the only underground line serving Richmond is the District. The Central London Railway would eventually extend further west, in the form of the Central Line extension to West Ruislip. But this wasn't quite the end. In 1989, the Central London Rail Study proposed once again running the Central Line to Richmond. The LSWR branch through Hammersmith had long since been built over, so this would have basically been a revival of the 1913 scheme. This, again, never happened. Will it ever? Well, it seems like the idea is never totally dead. So, I hope you enjoyed this extensive tale from the Tube. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Let me know in the comments what you think of this idea. Did the Underground Group make the right call, or do you think that any version of the Central London Railway's extensions had potential? I'd like to thank my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon for your always generous support. You are the CLR train to my disused branch line. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the Tube.